The FBI says it's a dead end. Retired law enforcement says otherwise. And the timing, 8 minutes, sits at the center of everything. This is not a theory. This is documented surveillance footage showing vehicle activity on a back road leading out of Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood at the exact time investigators believe she was being removed from her home. This is a retired NYPD detective publicly stating he has identified the make and model of one of those vehicles based on frame-by-frame analysis. And this is an FBI source telling media outlets within hours of that footage becoming public that it has no association with the kidnapping. Dismissed overnight, missing 27 days. Something doesn't add up. And on day 27 of the most intensive search in Arizona history, what doesn't add up matters more than what does. Before we go further, if you're following this case and want updates the moment they break, subscribe now and turn on notifications. This channel does not speculate. We examine documented evidence, official statements, and contradictions in the investigative record. Every claim you hear will be sourced. Every timeline will be verified. And every question we ask is based on what law enforcement itself has confirmed or what credible reporting has established. Hit that like button if you think the public deserves transparency in cases like this. Because what I'm about to show you raises questions that investigators, whether they want to or not, are going to have to answer. Let's start with what the FBI told TMZ this morning. According to their source, the Ring camera footage showing 12 vehicles passing through the Catalina foothills area between midnight and 6 a.m. on February 1st is, quote, a dead end. The source stated that the area where the cars were driving, as well as the ingress and egress routes, led the agency to conclude that the vehicles have no association with Nancy Guthrie's kidnapping, and that statement was made public this morning. The footage itself was reported by Fox News Digital yesterday evening, which means the FBI reviewed this evidence, analyzed the route, cross-referenced the vehicles, and reached a definitive conclusion in less than 12 hours. 12 hours. That is remarkably fast for an agency that has spent 27 days canvassing neighborhoods, reviewing tens of thousands of hours of surveillance footage, and following up on more than 21,000 tips. Now, Moss, let me show you what the FBI ruled out so quickly. The footage comes from a Ring camera owned by Elias and Danielle Strategalis, residents of the Catalina foothills neighborhood where Nancy Guthrie lived. Their home sits on North Camino Real, a back road approximately 2.5 meters from New York's residence. The recording captured activity from midnight to 6 a.m. on February 1st. Most of that activity occurred near the 2:30 a.m. mark. 2:30 a.m. is not a random time. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker stopped syncing with her iPhone at 2:28 a.m. that morning, according to what Puma County Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed publicly. Investigators believe that moment, 2:28, represents the time Nancy was removed from her home or the time her pacemaker's Bluetooth connection was deliberately severed. Either way, 228 is the critical timestamp in this entire investigation. Watch what happens next. In the Strategulia's Ring camera, captured one vehicle passing their home at 2:31 a.m., 3 minutes after the pacemaker stopped. It captured a second vehicle at 2:36 a.m., 8 minutes after the pacemaker stopped. 8 minutes. One back road. Zero explanation. If someone took Nancy Guthrie from her home at 2:28 and needed to leave the neighborhood quickly while avoiding major intersections and traffic cameras, North Camino Real is exactly the route you would take. And 8 minutes is exactly how long it would take to drive from NY's address to the Stradiglia's home. Fox News Digital confirmed with the Stradiglia family that their house is roughly a 7-minute drive from Nancy Guthrie's residence under normal conditions. At 2:30 in the morning with no traffic, that drive would take even less time. The route itself, according to Fox's reporting, leads out of the Catalina Foothills neighborhood while avoiding major intersections. This is not a through street, or this is not a road people use unless they live in the area or unless they are deliberately choosing a path that minimizes exposure to surveillance infrastructure. Here is where it gets more complicated. The Stradiglia's home sits approximately 2.5 meters from the crime scene. When the FBI initially canvassed the neighborhood for surveillance footage, they sent ring alerts to homeowners within a 2-meter radius of NY's address, requesting any video captured between January 1st and February 2nd. Thanks, the Stradiglia's house fell outside that radius. No one from law enforcement contacted them. No one asked for their footage. No one knocked on their door to ask if they had seen anything unusual. Danielle Stratigoulis told Fox News Digital that she and her husband found it odd that law enforcement had not visited their neighborhood at all in the nearly 4 weeks since Nancy disappeared. She said the number of cars passing that night was not unusual for the area. But when she and a friend reviewed their Ring camera footage after learning about the case, they noticed the timing and decided to contact authorities. That is how this footage came to light. Not through systematic FBI canvassing, but because concerned neighbors checked their own cameras and flagged what they thought might be relevant. Let me pause here because this matters. The FBI has told the public repeatedly that they are reviewing tens of thousands of hours of surveillance video. They have described the collection, review, and analysis of footage as one of the key components of this investigation. An FBI official told NBC News just yesterday that the agency has amassed as many as 10,000 hours of video. 10,000 hours reviewed by federal agents. And yet, the one piece of footage that shows vehicle activity on a rear exit route leading out of New York's neighborhood at the exact time her pacemaker stopped sinking was not discovered by the FBI. It was discovered by neighbors who live just outside the canvas radius and who took it upon themselves to check. Now let's talk about the vehicle that passed at 2:36 a.m. Retired NYPD Detective Pat Broen reviewed the Ring camera footage and provided his analysis to Fox News. According to Broen, one of the vehicles captured in the video appears to be a Kia Soul based on its slanted roofline, window design, and vertical brake light configuration. Broen is not a random commentator. He spent decades in law enforcement in New York City. He knows how to analyze surveillance footage, and he is stating publicly that he has identified the make and model of a vehicle that was driving away from Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood 8 minutes after her pacemaker stopped transmitting. The car they won't talk about. If Broen is correct, investigators now have a specific vehicle type to focus on. Kia Soul is not the most common vehicle on the road, but it is distinctive enough that tracking sales, registrations, and ownership in the Tucson area would be a manageable investigative task. The FBI has already told the public that they are working with Walmart to identify purchasers of the Ozark Trail backpack seen in the doorbell camera footage from NY's home. The same methodology could be applied to Kia Soul ownership. Cross-reference registrations in Pima County with the timeline. Identify which Kia Soul owners have connections to the Catalina foothills area. Narrow the list further by examining cell tower data and travel patterns on the night of February 1st. This is basic investigative work. And yet the FBI has already ruled out the footage as having no association with the case. Why? What did they see in less than 12 hours that allowed them to discount a vehicle driving on an escape route at the exact time Nancy was being taken? The FBI has not explained that publicly. She says their source told TMZ only that the ingress and egress analysis led them to conclude the cars were unrelated. But the neighbors themselves, people who live in that area and who know those roads, have told Fox News that North Camino Real is absolutely a route that leads out of Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood. Your former FBI supervisory special agent and criminal profiler Jim Clemente told Fox News earlier this week that reaching out to the public and asking people to come forward with information is one of the most effective ways to narrow a suspect pool. Clemente suggested that the FBI should publicly ask anyone who was driving in the area between 1 and 3 a.m. on February 1st to contact authorities, even if they have nothing suspicious to report. He noted that if investigators can identify the owners of the vehicles seen in this footage and any of those owners fail to come forward voluntarily, that in itself becomes a red flag worth investigating further. Clemente is not the only expert questioning the speed with which this footage was set aside. Multiple former law enforcement officials who spoke to media outlets this week have expressed surprise that the FBI would rule out evidence so quickly in a case where investigators have publicly stated they're following every viable lead. The Pima County Sheriff's Department reiterated just 2 days ago that the investigation remains active and will continue until Nancy Guthrie is located or all leads have been exhausted. You're setting aside surveillance footage showing vehicles on an escape route 8 minutes after the victim's pacemaker stopped does not sound like exhausting all leads. It sounds like the opposite. Let me walk you through the timeline one more time because the precision of these timestamps is what makes this footage so difficult to ignore. 2:28 a.m. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker stopped syncing with her iPhone. This is the moment investigators believe she was either removed from her home or the moment someone deliberately disabled the Bluetooth connection on her pacemaker. 2:31 a.m. First vehicle passes the Stratiga's home on North Camino Real. 3 minutes after the pacemaker event. 2:36 a.m. Second vehicle passes the same location 8 minutes after the pacemaker event. Look at those numbers again. If you are trying to remove someone from a residential neighborhood in the middle of the night and you need to avoid detection, you do not drive down the main roads. You do not pass through intersections with traffic cameras. You do not take routes where other drivers might see you or where your license plate might be captured by automated systems. You take back roads. You take routes that minimize exposure. And if you're smart, you use 2 vehicles. One to transport the victim, and one to follow at a distance and provide counter surveillance or assistance if something goes wrong. 2 vehicles leaving NY's neighborhood within 8 minutes of her pacemaker stopping. Using a rear exit that avoids major intersections is not proof of involvement, but it is absolutely something that should be investigated rather than discounted overnight. And that is where the contradiction sits. The FBI says, dead end. The neighbors say, escape route. URI retired law enforcement says, identifiable vehicle, and the timing says, pay attention. There is more. Fox News Digital also reported that another neighbor in the same area saw a suspicious man on February 2nd, the day after Nancy disappeared. The neighbor described the man as approximately 5 feet 9 inches in tall, Hispanic, with a close-trimmed beard, wearing a silver bracelet and smoking a cigarette. She said she saw him walking near what appeared to be an abandoned car around the corner from North Camino Reale. 5 feet 9 inches in matches the FBI's description of the suspect seen on NY's doorbell camera. The FBI described that individual as a male between 5 feet 9 and 5'10", with an average build. This sighting occurred on February 2nd, which would be the day after the abduction. If someone was involved in removing Nancy from her home and used North Camino Real as an escape route, in returning to that area the following day to retrieve a vehicle or to check whether the route had been discovered by law enforcement would not be unusual behavior. Criminals returned to crime scenes. They returned to disposal sites. They return to locations connected to their crimes because they want to know if investigators are paying attention. The neighbor who reported this sighting said the man looked out of place. He was not dressed for walking. He did not appear to be exercising, as he was simply standing near an abandoned vehicle in an area where people generally do not walk. That description, a man matching the FBI's physical profile in the area where escape route vehicles were captured one day after the crime, is not nothing. It is another piece of information that fits the pattern. And it is another piece of information that, as far as we know, has not been publicly addressed by the FBI. And there is still more. Fox News also reported that a different neighbor saw an unidentified man in mid-January walking near an intersection that leads to Nancy Guthrie's home. The neighbor said the man did not have typical walking gear on. His hat was pulled far down over his eyes. He appeared younger, and he just did not look like someone out for a casual walk. The neighbor had never encountered this person before or after that sighting. Mid-January is weeks before Nancy disappeared. But it is also consistent with the pattern that has emerged throughout this investigation. Surveillance, reconnaissance, pre-operational activity. The FBI released footage from January 23rd showing an individual walking backward down a street near NY's home. Behavior that multiple law enforcement experts described as consistent with someone conducting counter-surveillance or testing response times. If there was another suspicious individual in mid-January walking near NY's neighborhood with his hat pulled down and no apparent purpose for being there, that suggests the surveillance activity may have started even earlier than January 23rd. Step back and look at the entire pattern. Mid-January, suspicious man near NY's home, hat pulled down, out of place. January 23rd, backward walker conducting what appears to be reconnaissance. February 1st, 2 vehicles on a back road at 2:30 a.m. were 8 minutes after New York's Pacemaker stops. February 2nd, man matching the FBI's suspect description seen near that same back road next to an abandoned car. Every one of these data points fits a pre-planned operation conducted by people who spent weeks learning the neighborhood, the routes, the surveillance infrastructure, and the timing. The FBI has not publicly connected these sightings. They have not confirmed whether the mid-January man, the January 23rd backward walker, the person on NY's doorbell camera, and the man seen on February 2nd are related. But the public is connecting them, and the timeline supports those connections more than it contradicts them. Now let's address the FBI's explanation for why they set aside the North Camino reel footage. According to what sources told media outlets, the FBI likely used geofencing technology to identify the vehicles seen in the Ring camera video. Geofencing allows investigators to request data from cell phone carriers showing which devices were in a specific geographic area at a specific time. If the FBI threw a geofence around North Camino reel for the time period between 2 and 3 a.m. on February 1st, they would receive a list of every phone that pinged a cell tower in that area during that window. From there, investigators can identify the owners of those devices, cross-reference them with vehicle registrations, and potentially rule out each car based on where the driver was coming from or going to. If all 12 vehicles seen in the footage correspond to phones that were active and whose owners have been contacted and cleared, then the FBI would have a legitimate basis for setting aside the footage. The problem is that the Stradigalis family says no one from law enforcement contacted them until after the Fox News report aired, which means the FBI had not been to that location, or they had not collected that footage. They had not known about that road as a potential escape route until yesterday, and here is the other problem. If the suspects in this case were sophisticated enough to conduct weeks of pre-operational surveillance, to disable NY's doorbell camera, to time their approach to avoid detection, and to remove an 84-year-old woman from her home in the middle of the night without triggering a neighbor response, whereas they were absolutely sophisticated enough to leave their cell phones at home. The FBI has confirmed publicly that they found no cell phone activity around NY's property during the critical time window. Whoever did this didn't bring phones. They likely used handheld radios or operated in complete communication silence. So if the suspects were not carrying phones, geofencing would not identify them. It would only identify the other 10 or 11 vehicles that happened to be driving through that area for unrelated reasons. And ruling out those 10 vehicles does not rule out the possibility that 1 or 2 of the 12 cars captured in the footage belong to people who deliberately left their phones elsewhere. Former FBI profiler Jim Clemente made this exact point during his interview with Fox. He said that if 1 or 2 of the vehicles in that footage show no telematics pinging and no phone activity, that would actually be more suspicious, not less. Because legitimate drivers at 2:30 in the morning are almost always carrying phones. Their vehicles have GPS systems. Their cars have OnStar or similar tracking services. If a vehicle appears in that footage and there is no corresponding digital signature, that is a vehicle that should move to the top of the investigative list, not be set aside as irrelevant. The speed of the decision is what raises the most questions. Less than 12 hours from the time Fox News Digital published the report to the time the FBI source told TMZ it was a dead end. 12 hours to gens the area, identify the owners of every device that pinged, contact those individuals, verify their stories, reference their vehicle registrations, and conclude definitively that none of the 12 cars have any connection to Nancy Guthrie's abduction. That would be extraordinarily efficient investigative work if it happened. But it would also require that every single vehicle in that footage corresponded to a phone, that every owner was immediately reachable, and that every explanation was immediately verifiable. That is a lot of assumptions stacked on top of each other. Compare that timeline to other aspects of this investigation. The FBI spent weeks recovering footage from NY's doorbell camera because the camera's back-end data had to be reconstructed after the device was disabled. i.e., that process took significant time and technical expertise. The DNA evidence collected from the glove, found 2 miles from NY's home, was sent to CODIS, the FBI's national database, and returned no match. That evidence is now being sent for forensic investigative genetic genealogy, a process that can take weeks or months. The FBI has told the public they are reviewing 10,000 hours of surveillance video, a task that requires agents to watch footage in real time because fast-forwarding risks missing critical details. All of that work takes time. Careful, methodical, exhaustive time. And yet, 12 cars on an escape route, 8 minutes after the victim's pacemaker stopped, were ruled out overnight. The contrast is difficult to reconcile. Let me also address what the FBI did not say. They did not say the footage was reviewed and found to be unrelated. They said the ingress and egress analysis led them to conclude the cars had no association. That phrasing is specific. It suggests the FBI's conclusion is based on the route itself, not on identifying and clearing the individual vehicles. But the neighbors who live in that area and who know those roads have told reporters that North Camino Real absolutely leads out of the Catalina Foothills neighborhood. Fox News described it as a back road that avoids major intersections. That description came from local reporting, not from speculation. If the FBI's conclusion is based on the belief that North Camino Real is not a viable escape route, they are contradicting people who live there. And if their conclusion is based on successfully identifying and clearing all 12 vehicles, they have not explained how that was accomplished so quickly, or why none of those drivers have come forward publicly to confirm they were contacted. Yes, the other detail that hasn't been addressed is the second vehicle. The Ring camera captured 2 cars in close succession, 231 and 236. If this was a planned operation involving multiple people, using 2 vehicles would make operational sense. The first vehicle could transport the victim, which the second vehicle could follow to provide counter surveillance to intervene if the first vehicle was stopped, or to create distance between the suspect and the victim if law enforcement responded faster than expected. 2 vehicles leaving the neighborhood minutes apart on a rear exit is not proof of coordination, but it is consistent with how organized crimes are committed, and it is the kind of detail that should prompt further investigation, not immediate dismissal. Puma County Sheriff Chris Nanos told NBC News earlier this week that authorities are getting closer to identifying the clothing seen in the doorbell camera footage, including the shoes, pants, shirt, and jacket worn by the suspect. He said investigators are working with retailers and manufacturers to track down where those items were purchased. That kind of methodical work makes sense. It is slow. It is detail-oriented. It is the foundation of solid casework. But if the sheriff's department is spending time identifying where a pair of shoes was purchased, why is the FBI setting aside footage of vehicles on an escape route in less than 12 hours. The investigative priorities do not align. Either this footage is worth investigating, in which case it should receive the same careful attention as every other piece of evidence, or it is not worth investigating, in which case the FBI should explain publicly why the timing, the route, and the vehicle identification by a retired detective are all irrelevant. As of today, Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 27 days. Her family announced a $1 million reward for information leading to her recovery, dead or alive. Savannah Guthrie posted a video on Instagram yesterday pleading for anyone with information to come forward. She said, "Someone out there knows something that can bring her home. Somebody knows. We are begging you to please come forward now." The Puma County Sheriff's Department confirmed this week that the investigation remains active and that resources are being refocused on detectives specifically assigned to the case. The FBI has moved some operations to Phoenix, but maintains boots on the ground in Tucson. Investigators are continuing to pursue all viable leads, according to official statements, and yet, viable leads are being set aside in less than 12 hours. Surveillance footage showing vehicles at the critical time on a known escape route is being ruled out before the public even knows it exists. A retired detective's vehicle identification is being ignored, and neighbors who live in the area and who understand the geography are being told their observations about ingress and egress routes are incorrect. Something is not adding up. And in an investigation where an 84-year-old woman with limited mobility has been missing for nearly a month, what does not add up deserves scrutiny. I want to be very clear about what I am saying and what I am not saying. I am not saying the FBI is wrong. I am not saying the vehicles in that footage are definitively connected to Nancy Guthrie's abduction. I am not accusing anyone of incompetence or cover-up. What I am saying is that the speed and certainty with which this evidence was set aside does not match the methodical, exhaustive approach that has characterized the rest of this investigation. And when contradictions like that appear, they deserve explanation. The public has a right to know how the FBI reached its conclusion. Was every vehicle identified? Was every owner contacted? Did any of the vehicles lack corresponding phone or GPS data? Were the drivers able to provide verifiable explanations for why they were on that road at that time? Those are not unreasonable questions. They are the questions any journalist or concerned citizen would ask when told that critical evidence has been ruled out without public explanation. If the FBI is correct and the footage truly has no connection to the case, then transparency about how that determination was made would strengthen public confidence in the investigation. If the FBI is incorrect, or if the decision was premature, then reconsidering this evidence could potentially break the case open. Either way, silence is not the answer. Nancy Guthrie deserves better. Her family deserves better. And the public that has contributed more than 21,000 tips and followed this case with extraordinary attention deserves to understand why evidence that appears relevant on its face is being set aside without explanation. This case is not over. The investigation continues, and the questions surrounding this footage are not going away. If you have information about vehicles in the Catalina Foothills area on the morning of February 1st, contact the FBI. If you own a Kia Soul and were driving in that area, contact authorities. Even if you believe your presence was unrelated, and if you know anything, anything at all about what happened to Nancy Guthrie, now is the time to come forward. Subscribe to this channel for updates as they develop. Turn on notifications and share this video with anyone following this case, because transparency and accountability matter. And in a case where every minute counts, setting aside evidence in 12 hours without explanation is something the public has a right to question. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 27 days. Someone knows where she is and that someone is watching this coverage just like you are.